Alright, what's good YouTube? It's Jojo ASMR here. Welcome back to another video on the channel. So with the recent September ban list, everyone's asking what are the best decks. Some people think that this ban list was ineffective and not much changed, and others think that it's actually quite an impactful ban list, but you have to look a little bit closer. So joining me today with today's, I guess, tier list video, looking through some of the best decks and worst decks of the format, I have none other than Luke Sacco. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Lucas Sacco. I'm a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player. I play a lot of cardboard. It's about my credentials.
Fantastic. Alright, so yeah, I brought Luke over on to help me with this tier list today because I feel like you play probably more than me, to be honest with you. But I'm going to be going down to YCS Anaheim in December, which is mad. And we'll finally get to meet and hang out, which is hella sick, eh? So yeah, we're going to be doing a tier list video. We're going to jump straight into it. I'm very excited to do it. And yeah, make sure you check out Luke's channel. I'll leave a link down below in the description. And let's just jump right into it. First off, we have Branded. So we saw Branded Fusion go into 1. Do you think that this actually is a meaningful hit? What do you reckon?
So Branded Fusion going to 1 is really weird. It makes DD Crow a little bit more impactful versus the deck, because there are a lot of lines in the deck where you go like Banish Retribution, target Branded Fusion to add it to your hand. And it hitting that with Crow cuts it off from circulation. The only way to retrieve it at that point is using Spriggan's Kit. But it's mostly a consistency hit. The deck still is at basically full power.
Sanctifier somehow didn't get banned, so yeah, you can still gimmick up at everyone, which is say what you will about that. So what I mean, also like maybe yeah, I'd say it's still pretty good. Like, what do you reckon? I'm considering putting it because it can still just gimmick puppet lock. Yeah, I'd put it at 1.5. It's still great. Next we have Centurion, which is one of the biggest, I would say, in some ways, losers of the ban list, despite it, none of its actual cards got hit. Its primary win condition we've seen is King Calamity is finally out of the game, thank God. So do you think that Centurion can pivot and maybe instead of making King Calamity, maybe Crimson Dragon can summon other stuff like Quasar? And do you think that it's still a decent deck to be reckoned with?
I think for right now, the deck is pretty bad. It does have some cool interactions it can do. It can make the Cosmic Blazar, and that card's absolutely insane. But I think this deck is probably like Rogue at best, maybe tier 2, until the new cards come out for it, because this deck is still getting more support.
Okay, so maybe just for until October, when I'm guessing the new cards come out in Rhoda, right? In Rage?
Yeah.
Okay, so how about for now, we'll just put it in Rogue. But I do, yeah, I can get down with that. Next we have the Illusion deck, which, I mean, seems to be pretty good. I mean, it's got all of the Fiendsmith cards still in its toolbox, and in October, as you said earlier when we were not filming, it's going to be able to use Azumina cards, which is quite strong. But for now, with just the current month of September, without considering Rage of the Abyss, how do we think the Illusion deck is looking?
I think it's like a serious tier 2 competitor. The deck has a very, very strong inboard, especially because they are able to utilize the Rabbit really well with it being an illusion. And honestly, if this deck goes first, you should be losing just about 90% of the time unless you're able to hand trap them to death, because this deck is very good into board breakers. I'd put it around tier 2.
You get with Gazelle, as you said, like it has Chimera Fusion, so it can dodge board breakers instead of like Guardian Chimera. Obviously, the Fiendsmith cards are still super synergized well with this deck. Yeah, I agree. I have a lot of respect for this deck, and I'm sure it'll only get better down the format. So could even go up higher as the format goes on, which will be fun to see. Next we have Tenpai, which it lost 2 copies of Sengen Summoning, which I personally don't think this deck is... I mean, it's maybe just because I play some decks which have a good matchup against it, but I've never been a huge fan of Tenpai, but I think with it losing 2 copies of the field spell, it makes it a lot more easy to interact with. So how are you feeling about Tenpai post list?
I personally feel like this deck is not great. I think it loses way too many starters in order to be playable. Getting the field spell removed also hurts just way too much, honestly, for the deck, because the main 2 decks of the format will be ending with like a way to make SP on your opponent's turn, and banishing the field spell, taking it out of rotation permanently, is really strong. It's just going to cut off so much access to that ability to kill, which is the reason the deck is good.
Yeah, it's also going to stop some of the OTK lines in the battle phase with like Hydra setting it, I assume.
Yeah.
So I think that the deck actually gets quite a bit better when we get Rage of the Abyss, because we get the new Mole Chummy card, and then having like 6 Max Cs in your deck is, I think, what will make the deck a little bit better. But I think for now, until we get those new cards in Rage of the Abyss, I think it's gonna have a high representation anyway. But like personally, I don't think the deck is all that great. I want to put it like at the very bottom of like I just want to put it at maybe at the very top of tier 2 or like bottom of tier 1.5. Like it's sort of whatever. Like obviously if a good pilot plays it, I'm gonna put it at the top of tier 2. But yeah, it doesn't really. Yeah, I'm sure it'll get better as time goes on. Next we have Dragon Link, which I have no experience with this deck. This is here just before I clicked on it. So what do you think about D-Link post list?
Dragon Link actually has a lot of good like attributes going in the next format. It plays Bestials in the main deck, which is really important for like the more important decks of the format. Hitting Fiendsmith as just like a wide coverage with your main deck Bestial monsters is very powerful. Obviously, this deck didn't lose any of the Bestial monsters like we had thought. It didn't get Druid Worm or Baldrake on the list, so having those still in the deck's rotation is very powerful. But this deck can end on a lot of disruptions. It's probably the second or third best combo deck of the format. And if you're wanting to play dragons, it's honestly not a bad choice considering the deck can play a lot of non-engine.
Wow. All right. I actually haven't seen this deck at all. Like, I have not played against this deck in ages, and I think, you know, you make a good point that because Fiendsmith is in the format, it's probably just like a good, maybe it's like a good anti-meta, like a good call into a Fiendsmith format, as it looks like we're going to see a ton of Engravers upcoming. So I don't know, like I haven't seen personally anyone really playing this deck, but do you think it's something which is like maybe a hidden gem in the format maybe?
I think it's like a solid tier 2 deck. I wouldn't necessarily put it any higher than that. But I definitely think it's stronger than most of the other decks in the format, and I feel like this is a deck that you can expect to play against maybe every other regional, every other local, something like that.
Wow, alright, I was not expecting that. Okay, well, I'll take your word for it. I'll put it, for now, maybe I'll just put it at the bottom of tier 2, just because it doesn't seem like it has the representation to really back up the numbers as of now, so I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, that's alright.
Alright. So next we have Drytron. So we have Eva coming off the ban list finally, but I think looking at the new Drytron support, especially the new cards that we've received, the new Ritual Monster and the new like 1-card combo card, it locks you into Ritual summoning only like machine Ritual monsters, and it seems to me like if Eva is back, like I want to sort of have a hand of orange like Eva in the hand, which I think in practice is maybe not as easy to do, especially in a format where everyone's playing Bestials. So do you think that Eva coming off the ban list is an actual impactful change to Drytron's, you know, potency in the format?
Not at all. If you look at some of the OCG lists that were playing Drytron, you'll notice that they're really not utilizing that either. They're kind of playing a very standard list to what we have over here. And overall, it's not doing too much over here. I don't see why it would change.
Yeah, it also lost like Baron Defleur, which was one of the most common, I guess, like it's sort of like their version of Apo a lot of the time. Like you would set up a Baron with like Diviner as it's a level 6 tuner sometimes, and you dump. I feel like it's hard because you got to open quite specific and already open one of those light fairies to be able to search. To be honest, I'm kind of wanting to put Drytron at just bulk. I mean, sorry, not bulk it, like the bottom of Rogue. I've not seen this deck anywhere, and I feel like especially going into this format with Bestials everywhere and a ton of hand traps, doesn't really look too good to me. Next we have Salamangreat, which, yeah, what do you reckon?
Rogue at best. I don't like this deck. It's cool. It has some really neat interactions of like clearing the field, but honestly, this is just one of the worst decks of the format that does totally lose to Nibiru. If you're going to play a deck that I think loses to Nibiru really hard, you should play Ritual Beast, as the deck has very, very high like board potential. Being able to punish your opponents really good. I don't think it's worth playing a deck that the 1-card combo, 2-card, 3-card combos all lose to Nibiru just to end with like a pretty fair board.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I actually would say, where do you reckon you would want to put this?
I would put in Rogue just because you will expect to see it. If you don't open Nibiru, the board is okay. It has like a full board wipe. It has several pops. It can have an Omni Negate depending on how well they open. And then they have like a Princess pop and a float. But besides that, that's like the best the board will get. And a lot of the decks right now, like Snake Eyes, Yubel, those don't really care about like field wipes. They can usually end up playing through that pretty easily, or forcing other disruptions that cause those. So I'd probably put it down to Rogue for now.
Okay. Here's a deck I've been seeing get a little bit of hype after the ban list with some of the hits to Snake Eye, which is Fire King, which I assume like includes like the pure version, even though we don't have volcanics, as well as like splashing a Snake Eye engine into it. I took a look at this personally. It seems not great to me, in my opinion at least. I'm not a huge fan of Fire King Snake Eye after this ban list, because like losing those 2 copies of Snake Eye Ash is really huge, and personally, in my opinion, between having to play Flameburge, Garunix, you can have awkward hands. It can't play as much non-engine as like a pure Snake Eye Fiendsmith variant. Like Kieran is nice to be able to dodge Impermanent Veiler, obviously, but I'm not too sure. Like, I found myself bricking quite a bit with this deck because of the Fire King cards can sometimes be not great to draw, aside from Kieran. What are your thoughts on Fire King?
I have a really different view on Fire King. I think this is one of the strongest going first decks of the format. It's up there with like Yubel and Ritual Beast when it comes to like the ceiling of the deck. Because the 1-card combos that we were testing were all ending with like Caesar, Arvada, and Ambler Whale, with IP in your graveyard, Garunix in your graveyard, everything loaded up. And so I think this deck is actually like a tier 1.5 pick, to be honest. It can play up to 15 on engine when a 40-card deck, which is still really good. It has enough consistency cards to like hit the minimum that you want of like 14 starters in the deck. The only thing that I think like helps this deck out more than Snake Eye is its ability to play through hand traps, which is what Kieran is providing.
Yeah, it's true. I have no idea how you were able to fit 15 non-engine, like 15 hand traps. We're gonna have to talk about that off camera. But from what I've seen, I think some of the times I had issues with the deck is like going second sometimes in the sense that like I couldn't draw as much non-engine as if I was playing a different deck. But hey, I'm gonna take your word for it. If you think it belongs up here, then fair enough. I'm not gonna question the process. Gimmick Puppet lost some of its FTK tools. I don't know Gimmick Puppet well enough to know if the limits are actually impactful in stopping the FTK. I have seen that they can still FTK if they draw the field spell, but what are your thoughts?
So the deck can FTK if it draws the field spell, like you had said. It still has the ability of all of its 2-card combos to do FTKs. The big hit to Gimmick Puppet came in its ability to play through hand traps. Usually if you have one hand trap now, whether it's a Bestial, Nibiru, Imperm, you're going to stop them from FTKing. Just having any sort of interaction is stopping the deck from achieving the FTK, which is good. Honestly, I think it's a great hit from Konami. Still allows the deck to punish people who are playing full board breakers, but also it hurts the deck enough to where you're not FTKing every person, which is, it's really cringe if that deck is going around FTKing through 5 hand traps.
Yeah, I'm not too like impressed with this deck in the sense like if it can't FTK you consistently through hand traps, I question if people are really going to keep playing this deck. So, I mean, I could see it being at sort of the top of Rogue, but I don't know what your thoughts are.
I'd put it like the bottom of tier 2, maybe a little bit better than Dragon Link. Just because it does still have a strong deck. Even if they're not able to FTK you, what they're able to do a lot of the time is burn you for like, I don't know, 6,500 damage or something like that, and then leave the Xyz monster on the field that burns you when it pops a monster, and then they basically finish the kill on your turn. So it is still a deck to like consider, because they have that as well as they have the trap that like takes control of your field. So they do still have some disruptions, as well as you have to be very careful when playing through the board because of things like the Xyz monster that'll finish you off.
Yeah, and they'll also, like, even if you enter a grind game, sometimes it can be difficult to out their Gimmick Puppets because the field spell makes it so that their guys can't be destroyed by, like, battle or unaffected. So, yeah. Alright. Next we have Racist, which, to be honest with me, just my initial opinion, I don't really see... I think it was really sad and disappointing. I don't even play Rescue Ace, but I know a lot of people wanted Airlifter to come off the ban list, so F to all the Rescue Ace players. I think if we got 3 Airlifter, this deck would have been really nice, but at the moment, I'm not too sure if there's a reason to play this deck over any of the other, like, Snake Eye variants. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I really agree with what you're saying. The deck has a lot of starters technically. If you like lay them all down, you have 3 Bonfire, 3 Witch, 3 Wanted, you have Rhoda, 1-for-1, Airlifter. The problem is that most of your like starters lose to Ash Blossom really hard. Especially like if you Ash the original, it also takes away like most of their extenders. Because like Witch, Wanted, and Bonfire, those all stem from getting original to resolve in order to play the game. If you Ash their original, there's a very, very good chance they end up passing the turn or not being able to play. And I think with the format being so hand trap orientated in the previous format, it'll continue to be like that. And Rescue Ace just doesn't have the ability to play through hand traps currently. I think this deck looks very promising post Azamina cards, but for right now, it's probably a Rogue at best.
Next we have Lab, which I'm gonna assume we can talk about like the simultaneous equation, like the heavy trap version. How do you feel about this deck?
I think the deck is cool. I don't think it's good enough to really consider playing it just because the deck does have problems going second. We're still making SP and removing cards from the field. We're still ending on Top Hat here. In fact, we'll probably end on Top Hat here more in this format than last format, and that's just more spell trap removal. So I think the trap version of Labyrinth actually got a little bit worse.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, like with Apo being out of the format and people want to have like a way to beat board breakers, like we've seen people make the Silhouette Rabbit to be able to set like Azaroon, or I've seen in even decks like Memento, they sometimes set like other continuous traps because they can set up stuff with the field spell. So yeah, I like Lab. I mean, it's always there, and like there's always a one Lab player in Top Cut at all these YCSs, it seems like. So I respect the deck. I'm kind of wanting to put it at the top of Rogue for that reason. But yeah, I mean, Lab's just going to do Lab stuff. I respect Lab, but it doesn't really have the numbers in Top Cut representation to warrant me putting it any higher. And also, to be fair, like some of these other decks, like we haven't seen Dragon Link in any Top Cut, but like it's also, we're also taking into account, I guess, like the potential that the deck has, we reckon, going into these new events, which is why like we're probably putting them as high as we are here. Yeah. Next we have Vovo, Voiceless Voice. This deck didn't really get touched in any way, and it seems like it's doing the same thing, but I haven't really seen this deck in any sort of Top Cut lately. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think Voiceless Voice is a really cool deck. It has nice interactions. I like how it layers its field. However, this deck is almost unplayable going second. The only way this deck is able to win going second usually is if it has like very, very large board breakers, like evenly matched thrust to grab evenly matched talents, things like that they can stack on top of each other to basically reset the game, and then they do a turn 1 combo with the deck. And because of that, I think the deck does lose a lot of its competitiveness because it's a die roll with the deck, to be honest.
Yeah, like the deck is so telegraphed, and there aren't really many like avenues of comboing or playing. Like it's sort of like a one trick. You're just setting up low, getting barrier, you're getting, you know, Seravis and stuff like that, or Seraphis, the one that like searches the spell, whatever. But like my point being, like you said, it's just like a very linear deck, and most of the time like linear decks are not going to be as good as the other decks just because they can't do as many things as the other decks. So I also, for that reason, like it does have decent results, so like I'm kind of wanting to put it at the top of Rogue along with Labyrinth, it seems like to me. Yeah. Next we have a deck which I personally am really interested in, which is Memento. I think that this deck is pretty solid, and it looks like in Rage of the Abyss, like he told me, we're getting the Goblin Rider card, which is just like more starters, which is really nice for this deck. It can play a lot of non-engine. Its end boards are like crazy. A lot of people aren't playing DD Crow to hit the boss monster of the deck, and I think this deck is pretty solid overall.
Yeah, I very much agree. The deck has a lot of ceiling. The inboard for it is absolutely insane. You usually get at least 5 disruptions off of Cranium Burst alone, and then you're getting the other disruptions with SP Banish, the pop off the Fusion Monster, as well as if you look at what the OTG is kind of doing with the Silhouette Rabbit in this deck, they're playing this shot card called Apophis, and the Apophis is basically just like a hot red negate. It's going to negate cards on the field up to the continuous trap, and that makes it like very good into board breakers. This deck's major weak point last format was Tempai, and now that we have something that's like evening it out with the ceiling of other decks being the Banlist, and then we have a card and a way to play around Tempai. I think this deck looks really, really good.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I remember playing versus a Tempai player, and because the field spell, I believe, sets back the continuous, the engine continuous trap, right? And so that means that they're able to check on res with Apophilus. I don't know the name, but like the trap, which, like you said, is a hot red. So like sometimes, I don't know if now with Lacrima being banned, if they can also consistently end on Desiree, but like at least in last format, I would play against a full board, which would have like the full Memento board plus like Desiree and that trap card, and it was like impossible to beat. So I don't know if it can still make Desiree as much, but even without it, like its end board is still super impressive, and it's one of those combo decks that its just ceiling seems really high, and you can also outplay your opponents here and there. So I like this deck a lot, and in Rage of the Abyss, it's going to get even stronger. So I kind of want to put it around tier 1.5, maybe like the bottom of it, but I have a great deal of respect for this deck.
I think the deck is honestly a little bit better than Branded just because of the ability to play through hand traps seems really solid, whereas Branded can fold the one hand trap, and in most Memento boards you're playing through like 2 to 3 even.
Like you have the Fusion, you have the Bone Party, you have like a lot of like in-engine extenders, which is amazing. So yeah. All right, next we have my favorite deck. We have Rampengu, we have Ritual Beast. I play this deck a lot, so from my opinion, how I see it, I think that, well, obviously this deck had no hits. There's no Protoss hit, there's no Shifter hit, which is fantastic for the deck. The 2 Prosperities is quite impactful in my opinion. I don't know how people have been playing this deck with that 3 pot. I think you have to play it, so because the best like hands that Ritual Beast can get are like Pengu Elder or are like Elder, Pengu, Elder, Canahawk, or Inheritance plus any of those cards, because those are the only cards, like hands in the deck that can beat Nib. And I feel like the deck is strongest when it draws like those Elder combos. So losing 2 pot is actually quite impactful in my opinion, and with losing Appaloosa as well, like yes, you can still beat Nib with those 2 card combos, but you also need to draw like a 3rd Ritual Beast card to make the early ulti guy Apelio. I think that this deck, when it was first, like when the new support first came out, like for the Oceanic World Championship qualifier and for Euros, when the people still weren't as familiar with the matchup, this deck to me was so strong. And but I feel like as people have become more familiar with the matchup, I think the deck has gotten a little weaker. Obviously, the fact that it's still a Shifter is like a pseudo blowout card. So that's crazy. Protoss is obviously crazy, going first and second into boards. You can also play Colossus if you so wish. And you can play board breakers or you can play hand traps. Personally, like, I think that Ritual Beast, though, does have some consistency issues. And if you play against, like, a really solid player, like your opponent who isn't, like, a bozo and actually knows what you're doing, if they know how to hand trap you correctly, it's quite difficult sometimes. So, with being as, like, not, like, as, you know, impartial as possible, I think that Ritual Beast is, like, a high tier 2 deck. Because I can understand and like recognize the faults that the deck has. It has consistency problems as well sometimes, but it also has some incredibly good things. And if you can play and pilot this deck perfectly, you can do wonders with it. But I think objectively, as coming from a Ritual Beast player, I think that this deck is not probably tier 1. I think it's very high tier 2 though.
I agree. I think it's the best shifter deck depending on people's non-engine. But like depending on the non-engine that people play, it could switch between Tempai and the Ritual Beast deck to decide like what is the better shifter deck.
Yeah, but I think like Ritual Beast in general has a very good Tempai matchup. Like I don't think I've ever lost a match against Tempai playing Ritual Beast for so many reasons. Like the Tempai, the Protoss obviously is crazy. You have Ritual Beast Inheritance, which can like change the battle positions of like your Tempai monsters. It has even like the link for Reratoria being able to stop tributing can be really relevant when your opponent tries to use Genroku in the battle phase, of adding it off Kaiman and stuff. Just like little things stack up a lot. It has Spiritual Beast Tamalara in the graveyard to be able to protect against like Raigeki. So I think it has great matchups, but a lot of people don't play this deck because it's a bit hard to learn. Next we have Vanquish Soul. What do you reckon?
I think this bulk category needs to get some use. I think that deck is pretty bad.
Look, shout outs to Yellow Heart 1995. He's like this one guy in the OC scene that like plays only this deck, and he does okay with it. But it's like, I don't like this deck. I think it's so fair. Like its only thing that it has going for it is like Shifter, in my opinion. So that's why I'm putting it at the top of bulk. But yeah, like most of the time I see this deck win, it's not because of the Vanquish Soul cards, it's because of like nonsense like D-Shifter or Power Sync Stone or some random nonsense Floodgate. Yeah. Floodgate. Next we have Tearlament, which I guess while we're at it, I might as well put here. Oh, what was the other deck that plays like grass? I wanted to put it down. Yeah, Infernoid. So like we have the grass decks here, or like hypothetical grass decks. We have Tearlament. Shoutouts to that GGYGO who was sad that D-Shifter didn't get banned. What are your thoughts on Tier?
I really like Tier. This deck has a lot of cool things going for it. I like that this deck can still utilize the Fiendsmith stuff very well. If you look at kind of what people have been doing on YouTube and Twitter, they're actually using the Fiendsmith stuff to make Area Leader, and then using Area Leader to like combo a little bit more. You can send things like Shayama, and then use Shayama to destroy your own Kaleido Heart to play a little bit more. There's a lot of cool things this deck can do. I think that this deck still lacks the fact that it can't play any non-engine in it. Like you're basically playing like maybe 3 Dark Rose, 3 Talents on like the best like non-engine your deck can play in all 6 spots. But if he goes first, this deck is explosive, very explosive.
It still has access to like El Shaddoll Winder, and it's probably like of any deck that can play no non-engine that can actually have a chance at cracking a board, I'd say it's Tier. But there's going to be a ton of Dimension Shifter in this upcoming format, I expect. So like that in itself is hard. Do you think that people are going to try and experiment with grass, and do you think that it's an actual like competitively viable strat, or do you think they should just stick to the 40 card variants that we've been seeing?
I think they're going to try with grass. I don't think that grass is overall going to be super impactful as soon as it comes out, just because the card is at 1. Drawing it in a 60 card deck is like a 6-7% chance, and that's not enough for you to play like an extra 20 cards in your deck for like a 6% chance that you activate a card that might get Ash Blossomed, you know. I think the Tier is probably best as like a 40 card variant as it is right now.
Okay. I'm kind of wanting to... I respect Tearlament. I mean, it still has those... like, and also, instead of playing Beatrice because they lost that, they can instead, I see, they play this other rank 6, which is just like a Chaos Ruler. Like, it just mills 5.
Pilgrim Reaper, yeah.
Yeah, Pilgrim Reaper. So, like, I think it still can cook. So, I want to put it in Tier 2 as well. Yeah, I like Tearlament. And then we have... Decatron, we have Infernoid, which obviously can use grass, but like I'm not a fan of Infernoid. I think it has a lot of bricky hands, and yeah. What do you?
The plus side of Infernoid is that it can still utilize the Snake engine very well, and it has grass now. But I think it falls into the same category as like Tearlament, to where like a 40 card version of the deck is probably still better, just because like grass has such a low chance that you get access to it, even if you're playing Thrust. That means you're only really resolving it going first, because, I mean, Thrust is not always going to be able to add that, and even if it does, there is still a chance to get Ash Blossomed. I think this deck can set up a lot of cool disruptions, and honestly, it might be more powerful than the regular Snake Eye board right now, but it does play a lot of bricks, so I'd probably put it in Rogue, maybe even Bulk category.
Yeah, to me it makes like no sense that this deck would be on a higher position than Lab, so I think I just can't justify putting it higher than that, so I'm going to put it in Rogue for sure. Maybe like around, probably like here, I'm happy with. I feel like Lab and Voiceless are like the good sort of benchmark for like all these Rogue decks. Next we have Rabina. Shoutouts to like the 3 Flunder players. Flunder's just going to do what Flunder's done. Like, it's going to sack you with Harpy's Featherstorm and D-Shifter and other nonsense. So, like, it has that sack factor, but it can't play a lot of non-engine going second. And if it can, it's like, usually it's like board breakers we see and not really hand traps. So, I don't know. Like, I think Flu is a decent Rogue deck as well. I kind of just want to put it towards the top of Rogue. What are your thoughts?
About the same. The deck, you have to open what I call Lee Croker hands, because it's just some guy from Tulsa, Oklahoma is the GOAT. But you have to open like a perfect hand in order to win, right? You have to open Dark Ruler, Evenly, Robina, Field Spell, the Quick Play Spell, and Harpies to win the game sometimes. And that just is what the deck is. It's a deck where you have to open a perfect hand in order to win, like a lot of situations.
Next we have Sprite. Like, this deck's booty cheeks. Like, I don't know. Like, it's cool, but like, I can't imagine like being a Sprite player and like my opponent just like chummies me and they just draw like 3. They just go, oh, summon red, summon green, summon jet. Draw 2. Well, that's like so booty.
Yeah, I think the deck definitely has a problem playing through Chummy. However, the inboard of the deck is really strong. It's really strong. And it plays through the other hand traps almost flawlessly. The only problem really is Chummy. I'd put the deck in like a very low tier 2 category, to be honest, just because of how good it is going first. And it's ability to play through basically all other hand traps besides Chummy. But yeah, like I don't think I'd go any higher.
Yeah, it has to. You have to draw like nib combos to like stop that deck. Like you can't just draw nib. It has to be like nib imperm, nib Veiler. It has to be like combination of hand traps. I admit, but like I feel like board breakers can put a bit of work against this deck. Like your dark rulers, your evenlies, like double board breaker. I feel like a lot of the time into Sprite is like good enough because if you can deal with the front row, then you can deal with like the smashes or the double crosses in the back row and stuff like that. I think having Toad is quite cool as well with the Trishula, the Ice Barrier engine, and we did see like someone qualify for Worlds in South America with Sprite, albeit with like other cards. So look, fair enough. I'll put it in tier, like around tier 2. I think is fair. Another deck which did not get hit at all. Well, I guess Skill Drain did, but we have Runic, but Fountain and Tip didn't go anywhere in the list. So, I mean, I guess we're talking a pure Runic Stun here. It's not really the variants, but yeah. Do you think like Runic Stun is like still competitively viable even with 2 copies less of Drain?
Probably. I think this is probably one of the better decks of the format. At least top 5 decks of the format. The only thing that's like bad about this deck now is based on the hits on the ban list. A lot of the decks that are playable, you're gonna side Cosmic Cyclone against. Like Fire King will be played more. Memento Cosmic Cyclone's good against. Ubel, it's good against that. A lot of the decks that like you're gonna see next format, Cosmic Cyclone's very impactful against. So on accident, Runic Stun does also get hit by that. But Runic Stun is still basically at full power. It lost 2 floodgates, but I mean, I think people are just gonna start adapting more to what the like Whitewood Runic does, and just play like a ton of draw cards like Upstart, Chicken Game, and just have like a very good amount of access to the floodgates anyways, so I don't think it'll matter.
Where do you think you want to put it? I kind of, at that point, want to put it towards the top of tier 2, bottom of tier 1, but you think it's in like the top 5 decks, so I'm willing to put it maybe somewhere here if that's something you agree with. Right.
Yeah, I think that it's really cringe, but I think the deck is something to very much respect.
Yeah.
Going to the next format.
Next we have Kashtira, which, I mean, this deck was already like so inconsistent, but now it's lost 2 more copies of Prosperity. So like this isn't taking into account like Kashtira splashed as an engine into other decks. This is like strictly pure cash. Obviously it has D-Shifter, so it still has that sack factor to take into account, but to me this deck feels like a rogue deck, probably.
Yeah, I'd probably put it in Rogue, maybe even Bulk. The deck's just super inconsistent right now.
It's just bricky, and it's like you don't have a Rise Heart, you have 1 Prosperity, like, it just seems, obviously, like, there's the Shifter factor, which is also good, but, like, that doesn't mean Vanquish Soul, for example, is any better. I want to put it at, like, bottom of Rogue, like, top of Bulk.
Yeah, maybe Bulk.
Yeah, I'll put it, like, here, probably. Yeah, it's just not that good. Next we have Whitewood, and I'm gonna assume this is like Whitewood Runic. I've played against this deck now quite a bit. It did lose copies of Skill Drain, but like it didn't really need that. I think this deck is pretty interesting and quite a lot of fun. Like you're able to play triple Upstart, Chicken Game, get a lot of draw cards. You can play Talent. You can play. The end boards are quite good. You can end with like Cheng Ying, and you can end on like the Trap. Yeah, it's a very consistent deck. What are your thoughts?
I think this deck is also like a top 5 contender. I didn't really lose anything in the format. As well as having hits to Lacrimosa makes the U-Bell deck, which was the toughest matchup before the ban list, not end on Desiree as much. And with like the slight hit to U-Bell with that, I think this deck got even a little bit better. And the deck can play through hand traps almost flawlessly. Hand traps do nothing to this deck a very large amount of the time. As well as board breakers, it's pretty easy to play through those, except for Evenly. Evenly's a little bit tough, but even then you keep your field spell and you're able to manage your way through it. I think his deck's really solid.
Okay. I'm willing to put it somewhere around about here, maybe then?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Next we have Unchained. Just pure Unchained, I suppose. It doesn't seem like, to me, I mean, the deck did... Okay, like, it's now got 2 less copies of Shavara and 2 less copies of Prosperity than what it had, you know, when Unchained was at full power. And even then, people were complaining that the deck would sometimes brick and you would not want to draw like those one-of like engine requirement cards like Sarama and Shayama and, you know, a bomb and stuff like that. I think that losing 2 Prosperity is kind of a problem with this deck's already, you know, issue of consistency, but its endboard, it still didn't lose Wave King Caesar, it still has 3 armors, it still has Rage, so I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think for Unchained, this is more of like an Unchained Fiendsmith type thing. And Fiendsmith is like full combo in that deck as well, just because it gets you to like a lot of Fiend bodies. And the
That's my bad.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I wasn't even thinking about the Fiendsmith variant. I was just like thinking about pure Unchained, but yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, there's like a cool bridge in the deck as well, because they play Tour Guide. And they use Tour Guide to summon Fabled Kushano, which is just like a random Light Fiend from deck, which like lets you access the Fiendsmith stuff really early and use those cards to play around Nibiru. So usually the inboard ends up being something like Desiree, Caesar, Rage, and then Escape, which is a really strong inboard to be honest. The only thing this deck kind of has problems with is going second.
That's actually sick, so you can go like Tour Guide, get the Light Fiend, and then make an early Caesar, because like Unchained typically doesn't really need to use its normal summon because it has like Aruha Trap, for example, right? Oh, that's quite cool. I actually like that. So it's like more copies of Engraver pretty much with Tour Guide, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty decent. I actually like that quite a lot. And then like, can it also then play like Fiendish Rhino Warrior instead if you already draw like the Engraver, so you have another target for Tour Guide, or is that just like not really that good?
I've seen some builds that do it. A lot of the time you just use it to access the Fiendsmith engine, because worst case scenario, you summon it and then you make like Requiem, and then summon Engraver and make Yama.
Right. True. Alright, that sounds pretty good. I mean, I haven't actually seen anyone play this deck though. Do you think it's... But I think like in general, because it uses Fiendsmith cards, it has a good access to a good Fiend pile toolbox, so I kind of want to put it in tier 2 as well.
Yeah, probably right above like Chimera, the Illusion deck. It has a lot of power to the deck, to be honest.
I can see it though suffering from like not being able to fit as much non-engine, so like... Yeah, going second into a board, I can see why you say it might be a bit of a problem. Next we have Melodious, which hasn't really lost anything. I mean, some people didn't even play Prosperity, some people played Desires instead to get the draw off Concerto in the graveyard, but I think going into a Bestial format, I don't think this deck is just good enough, to be honest. It can't beat board breakers that well at all, and even with one field spell, I feel like its Tempai matchup is pretty terrible. It's literally just like a hand trap deck, and then it preys on its like Refrain or its Ostinato or its first movement solo, like just sticking. What are your thoughts?
I think the pure version of Melodious is probably not good enough to keep up the current like format. It's really easy to out its sort of endboard and just push through and kill them. And this deck is one of the decks that probably shouldn't be playing Nibiru, just because in order to play the game, you do have to have no monsters. But I think that the Snake Eye Melodious deck, I know it's not exactly what we're talking about, but it kind of fits in, is actually a deck that we'll see a little bit more play next format, just because the Melodious cards do add more like Snake Eye starters in the form of the level 4 Pendulum Girl's a starter and the Fusion Spell being a starter, the Ostinato.
Ah, that's true, yeah.
For the pure version, though, it's probably just a rogue deck.
Yeah.
For the Snake Eye Melodious one, maybe tier 2, tier 1.5. Probably tier 2, though.
Okay. I'm gonna put it just around about here because I know there are some people that play it, but yeah. Next we have Magic Spectre. It got 3 Kieran back. I mean, I think that this deck is just, I mean, Pendulum decks just without, even with Electromite in 2024, it's just not that good. So like, I don't think the 3rd Kieran is going to change anything about this deck, and for that reason, I'm just gonna put it straight into Rogue. I mean,
I'd put it honestly worse. It goes straight into bulk. If you're playing against someone that's competent, like with Snake Eye, if you hand trap them, you automatically lose the game because they just use your Flamebird. They use Flamebird to put the hand trap in your Pendulum Zone, and then you automatically lose the game.
Yeah, I mean, like, I have played against, like, with Magic Spectre, it does have access to, like, Pegasus, and that can just search Secret Village, which is kind of a bonkers floodgate, and it can just end on a good, like, a FTK end board if that deck goes uninterrupted, but, like, it's just a die roll deck in my opinion. Like, it can't really play that much non-engine, and then it's just, like, yeah. That's my problem. And actually, I have Altergeist. I want to put this in here just because it's like a pet deck, but this is like bottom of the barrel. This is like it's so bad.
Terrible.
Next we have a deck which, okay, I'm unironically going to say is like in Rogue, and it's Millennium. So I've played this deck. This deck actually kind of cooks. Actually, it has 3 Shifter. It doesn't use its normal summon. You can just like Lava Golem and Sphere Mode your opponent. It's extremely consistent. It plays like like all of the Millennium monsters are 1/1.5 card starters. It can play Floodgates like Secret Village. It can play even Gozen Rivalry. There can be. It can play Silhouette Rabbit. It's got like great tools in my opinion. I actually think this deck, when we're looking at this list, is by far better than any of these decks in bulk.
It's crazy, but I actually do agree with you. Explodia is a pretty decent deck.
And like, even though it does play 5 Garnets, like the deck makes up for it because you have 18, like, well now we've lost 2 pot, but you have 16 1-card starters, and this deck, after Rage of the Abyss, gets the new Millennium Blue Eyes monster, which is just more copies of Millennium Shield, which is great because it's just like, if everyone knows that, like, if you just Ash Blossom Millennium Shield, the game just ends on the spot because you lose access to Ankh, but having Blue Eyes being able to just discard itself in Rhoda for Millennium Ankh is fantastic. It gives you more ways to get to Ankh, and it also has a neat graveyard interruption effect where if your opponent special summons a 3k or higher or a level 8 or both monster to their side of the field, you can just send it to the graveyard to special Millennium Blue Eyes. So like, you know, I mean, you verse like, I don't know, Fire King, and they summon Kieran, you can just send it to the grave. You can send, you know, force out other negates like Regulus or whatever, summon nonsense. But I actually think this deck post Rage of the Abyss, and it still has 3 Shifter, which is a blowout card. I think this deck is actually a rogue deck, and you can do well with it. So I'm gonna put it. I'm standing by my ground. In fact, I'm gonna put it here. I don't know if I'm coping too much, but trust me.
Maybe a little bit, but.
Alright.
I kind of like it. It's better than Robina. I don't like Robina.
Yeah. Next we have PK. I don't know why I put this here. Like, I don't know. It's cool. It's got some stuff.
Bulk.
Yeah. Alright. I do think this
real
deck,
fast.
I'm putting it here. Alright. Next we have Senduki. This deck sucks without Mystic Mine, so it's in bulk.
Yeah.
Next we have, okay, so this is probably where we're gonna have a difference of opinion here. We have Cat. I personally, like, I'm from Oceania. Everyone knows that, like, there's a lot of Cat players here, and a lot of like our good players here in OS think that Cat is actually a very good deck. I will though admit that in the end of last format, even Poe said that Cat was unplayable because of how crazy the Fiendsmith, Snake Eye, and U-Bell deck was. But he claims that in this new format with the Snake Eye hits, that Cat is playable for sure and is actually quite good. I think that Cat is just it's one of those decks that you have to be so knowledgeable about the game in general to be able to like do really well with this deck. Like Poe, for example, could play like any deck, right, and he could probably win. But I think it might just be like that sort of an issue, but I think Cat is always gonna. I'm always scared sometimes to play against Cat. Like if I lose the die roll, they activate Field Spell. You know, they set up E Pearly with like double Sleepy or something. Like that's it just feels awful. And I think it has a good Tenpai matchup. I think it has a good Ritual Beast matchup. I think it in general, just like Noir is a crazy card still. It can play 15 hand traps or more non-engine. It's quite consistent. It has a bunch of barrages. D-Barrier cooks it, obviously. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think that maybe you're glazing this deck just a little bit too hard. I think the deck is playable. I definitely think it has a good matchup. And honestly, depending on the non-engine that you draw in this deck, this can just be a blowout against every deck. The ability to abuse beauty, the ability to abuse happiness, like into boards is so strong. And honestly, the deck's biggest strong suit is its ability to go second. But I think that with Chummy in the format, being able to block the equip off Noir a lot of the time, his deck is a little bit worse maybe than you're giving it credit for. I think it would be probably a tier 2 deck. It's definitely not rogue. It's better than a rogue deck. It's probably like mid tier 2.
All right. Yeah, I'm willing to make that concession. Like, again, it's like it doesn't have that much representation, and it's like only a handful of pretty good players are playing it. So, yeah, I'll put it right about here, I think. Next we have Luigi, which is definitely tier 1. Next we have Snake Eye. So, this is probably where a lot of people have just skipped to the video. They're talking about, okay, was the ban list effective enough to stop this deck? I've heard people say yes, I've heard people say no, I've heard people say yes until like Rage of the Abyss. So do you think in the September format up until we get the Azamina cards that this deck is competitively viable?
Viable, yes. The best deck, no. I think at best this deck is like a very, very low, probably bottom of tier 1, maybe even tier 2 deck. It has no grind game. It has to play a lot more breaks now in order for the deck to function. Like, you're having to play 2 Snake Eyes Oak in every deck. You're having to play Snake Eyes Birch. Do you know how bad Snake Eyes Birch is? Have you read it? It's terrible. And they're having to play those cards just to get their deck to work. Not to mention, the inboard is still really weird, and all of your 1-card combos have to be significantly worse in order to play around Nibiru. And you have to, like, cut down on the Fiendsmith package and just play one of it, because it's, like, it's not combo now. So I think that the deck is still playable, but by far not the best deck. I think everyone overreacted, including myself, when they saw the initial ban list.
So do you think it'd be okay to put it maybe at the bottom of tier 1.5?
Yeah, I think this is a perfect spot for it.
Okay. And then finally we have Yubel, which oh god, I did not mean to put it there, which I'm going to say is unequivocally the best deck of the format. Whether or not that changes into Rage of the Abyss and into YCS Anaheim when we get like the deck building set with the new decks, remains to be seen. But yeah, to me, it's like Yubel, it did lose 2 copies of Gates, and it did lose Apo, but I feel like if good players just adjust accordingly, like, it's gonna be still a great deck.
Yeah. Instead of playing Beatrice now, you do have to play the Necroquip and the Aerial Eater now. However, those aren't like too bad in comparison. I think that Beatrice was better, but the other versions are definitely not bad at all. You did lose 2 copies of Gates, you lost the Appaloosa. However, a lot of the better players were starting to cut Appaloosa anyways in favor of a deck that had a little bit more follow-up. A lot of the 2-card combos for this deck, since I've been testing it, you do end with Varudris and Desiree still, with like access to Rage and Phantom of Yubel. So you have like a lot actually on your inboard, and it plays through board breakers very, very well if you're able to achieve one of those like boards that has multiple hard disruptions on it. The only downside I think this deck has is that since you did lose Lacrimosa, its ability to make Desiree on every inboard is not possible. You can't take any 1-card combo and just turn Desiree on the field. I think the Lotus and Throne combo you can, but you're only able to make Desiree in combos that you already have access to the Yubel engine, which is something I'm not a fan of. But the deck is still absolutely the best deck in the format behind Luigi.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Luigi is, getting a run for its money, but I think Yubel is probably the best deck. I guess before we wrap it up, do we want to put any like specific... Oh, okay, so this is obviously here. Anything in tier 1.5 we want to switch around before we lock it in?
No, everything I think looks good, like the order of it. I think the rogue stuff is just kind of put in there randomly. I think Rescue Ace is definitely better than like Centurion and Melodious. But pretty much everything is fine.
I'm going to say... Tier 2, I think we did a pretty good job. I still don't know about Dragon Link. Like, I'm just going off your word, but I haven't seen anyone play this deck. So...
maybe it's in anything. NA players love this deck for some reason. But I think the deck has a lot of ceiling. It has a very high ceiling.
Alright. I think Ritual Beast has been well placed. I think Tempai. I think Lab is probably here or there. Same with Vovo. yeah, this looks pretty good to me. I think we've done a pretty decent job. I'll be curious to see what the community says about what we've done. And if there's a deck that we missed, it's just let us know. But yeah, thank you, Luke, so much for your time. I hope you had a good time, and thanks to everyone for watching. And remember to check out Luke Sacco's channel.
Thank you. Sounds good. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.